"You're letting your brother die, Emery." That was my mother's voice, angry, pleading, and echoing through the hospital lobby, all because I refused to take a compatibility test to donate a kidney to my brother Ethan. The whole lobby turned to stare at me like I was some cold-blooded monster. But when the results came back, I was the one left in shock. Not only was my blood type incompatible for a transplant, but the DNA results revealed something far more devastating. I wasn't their biological child. I was never meant to be loved. I was a backup plan, a walking insurance policy. But before I continue this story, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because what I'm about to share is the whole truth. My name is Emery Carter, 25 years old, working in the financial sector in Chicago. I was born and raised in a family where I always felt like a shadow, an extra, a kind of attachment that no one truly wanted to keep. My parents, Ronald and Willow, were mortuary workers, strict and emotionally cold. But with my older brother Ethan, things were different. Ethan was 3 years older than me, born with a congenital kidney disease, physically weak, yet spoiled to the core. He could drop out of school, drink, race cars, get into fights, and still be called the poor boy who needs protection. Meanwhile, I, despite excelling in school and never causing trouble, was always seen as the child without a heart, a stranger sharing the same roof. I remember nights I stayed up late studying, hoping for a word of encouragement, but the only thing my mother would say was, "Why aren't you sleeping? You have chores tomorrow." Ethan, even after causing chaos at school, would be served his favorite food, have his head patted, and be comforted. I became so used to the injustice that it no longer hurt. I only escaped that house when I went to college and rented a place 30 minutes away by car. I only came home for major holidays, spending the rest of my time juggling studies, part-time jobs, and relying on scholarships to get by. After graduation, I landed a job at a well-known financial firm in Chicago. Occasionally, my mother would call with polite small talk, asking if I had a boyfriend, but never once did she say she missed me. But then, one early winter evening, right after work, she called out of the blue, inviting me over for dinner, saying she had prepared a nutritious meal just for me: quinoa salad, pan-seared salmon, celery juice, things I had never seen in that cold kitchen before. The next day, my father surprised me with a dark brown leather handbag, saying, "You should carry something decent to work." I stood still, looking at them as if watching a newly staged play. They began asking about my health, telling me I should sleep earlier and take better care of myself. And I began to feel suspicious, not because I didn't want to believe they cared, but because after more than 20 years of being deemed not good enough, that sudden concern felt off. And I was right. Just a few days later, they told me to get a full medical checkup at St. Mary's Hospital. No explanation. Just said, "You're the only one who's never been sick." I went, carrying a sense of doubt and a vague instinct that what I was about to donate wouldn't be just blood for testing. After the full health checkup at St. Mary's Hospital, I called home and reported the results. Everything was within normal range. Blood pressure fine, blood sugar fine. Just one thing to improve. The doctor advised me to get more sleep and cut back on processed foods due to early signs of visceral fat. I chuckled while telling my mother, expecting her to encourage me to eat healthier or send me some detox tea. But their reaction made me pause. On the other end of the line, I heard my mother's soft chuckle, not the kind that signals relief, but like she had just released something she'd been holding in for a long time. My father muttered a few words, then blurted out, "Good. Very good." Immediately after, my mother told me to sleep early, wake up for light morning exercises, maybe start with yoga or jogging around the house. She had never cared about my routines, yet now she was suggesting things like she had just read a detailed health plan tailored specifically for me. I hung up feeling uneasy. as if something was waiting for me just ahead that I wasn't being told. And it came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, while I was preparing quarterly reports, my phone buzzed non-stop. My mother's name flashed on the screen. She wasn't calling to ask if I was tired, nor to wish me a good work week. She called to say, "Ethan's kidneys are failing. The doctor says there isn't much time." I stood frozen in the office, staring out the glass window at the busy street below. Her voice continued, "You're the family's last hope." I don't even remember how I agreed to go to the hospital. Maybe it was reflex. When I arrived at St. Mary's, Ethan was there, pale, yet still loudly complaining to the nurse about the food. Outside the room, my father, stone-faced as ever, shoved a consent form into my hand. "It's just compatibility testing, nothing major." But when I looked over at Ethan, memories flooded back. Him calling me a dumb bookworm in front of his friends, sneaking into my room to steal my savings, the money I had set aside to study for the CFA exam, and then blaming me for being careless. I remembered the one time I stood up for myself, and my mother said, "He's fragile, don't hold it against him." And now, that fragile person lay there, waiting for a piece of my body. I turned and walked swiftly into the hospital lobby when my mother's voice rang out behind me, sharp and loud like a sentence handed down. "You're letting your brother die, Emery." Everyone in the lobby turned to stare. I stood there, amidst unfamiliar eyes, as if I were some heartless monster. My throat tightened. No one stood up for me. No one asked if I was okay. I walked out of the hospital, still holding the consent form, and in my mind, one question repeated itself. If I weren't their biological child, would they still want to keep me? I signed the consent form, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bear another moment of being looked at like some heartless creature. After the blood test, I returned to my small apartment in Logan Square, sat on the single chair by the window, watching people pass by without really seeing them. The mark from the needle was still on my arm, my palms still cold. I called Olivia, the only close friend I had kept from college. She's a lawyer, smart, calm, and always knows when to stay silent. When I told her everything, from the healthy dinner, the designer bag, to my mother's scream in the hospital, she didn't rush to comfort me or get emotional. She just asked one question. Did they ever explicitly say it was compatibility testing for a kidney transplant? I froze. Actually, they had never used the word donation directly. It was always framed as a suggestion, as a health check, as the best thing you could do for the family. Olivia was quiet for a few seconds, then added, "Emery, if they truly loved you, they wouldn't need to hide it. Kindness can be faked. My mom once took me to nice restaurants for 3 weeks straight, before pressuring me to co-sign a loan for my gambling uncle. Everything has a reason, and good reasons usually don't come with a sense of dread." I looked out the window. The early December wind carried a biting chill. I began to recall every little sign, how my parents had recently asked if I ate breakfast, the messages saying, "Don't overwork," and especially the way they looked at me after my health report. Not the look of people happy their daughter was healthy, but the look of people confirming a vital requirement for a long-prepared plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every gift, every kind word, and suddenly, I felt like a supporting character in a family drama, kept around not out of love, but out of necessity. And what scared me the most was the growing sense that maybe I had never been considered a daughter to begin with. 3 days later, I returned to St. Mary's Hospital to hear the results. Dr. Wilkins, a man in his 50s with a calm, deep voice, invited me into a private consultation room. He opened my file on the computer, then looked at me with a hesitant expression. "Emery," he began. "Medically speaking, the results show your blood type is incompatible with Ethan Carter's. The success rate of a kidney transplant from you would be under 30%. I let out a faint breath, as if I had escaped a looming verdict, but then he continued. I deeply admire those who have donated a kidney to someone not biologically related. It's a humane and selfless act. But in your case, there's something that must be made clear. I looked at him, puzzled, tilting my head slightly. Why would you say Ethan and I aren't biologically related? We were both born to the same parents and grew up together. He paused for a few seconds, then gently said, your results show a completely different blood type from Ethan's, and they also don't match either of the two people you call your parents. We double-checked to eliminate any error. I'm very sorry to inform you, but biologically, you are neither Ethan's sibling nor the child of Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I heard every word clearly, no stuttering, no ambiguity. A short sentence, but one that shattered everything I thought formed the foundation of my childhood. I asked again, not even sure if it was my own voice. You mean I was adopted? He nodded slowly. We don't have details about your family history, but the biological data strongly suggests, if not confirms, that you share no genetic ties with the Carter family. And by regulation, when such results are found, the hospital is required to inform the individual directly. I sat still for a moment. It wasn't shock, it was free fall. With no one to catch me, no safety harness, no explanation. And what sent a chill down my spine was that I began to realize why my parents weren't the least bit surprised when I told them I was in perfect health. Because perhaps they already knew. They had known all along, and still pushed me into the tests, still intended for me to donate a kidney to Ethan, even knowing I wasn't a biological match. When I left the hospital, the winter sun still shone brightly, but all I felt was a vast emptiness in my chest. I didn't call anyone. I didn't say a word. I only knew one thing. From this moment forward, I had to follow the truth, not to blame anyone, but to understand why I was born only to serve someone else's life. That evening, I returned home in silence. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't take off my coat. I just sat on the hardwood floor in the middle of the living room and stared into nothingness. I had called them Mom and Dad for 25 years, and now I didn't even know whether I was truly chosen by them or merely part of some transaction, a biological deal, a backup plan. Memories that once seemed warm, now shattered like glass. I needed answers. But I knew Ronald and Willow wouldn't give me anything unless forced. So I decided to find it myself. The next afternoon, I went to my parents' house under the pretense of visiting Ethan and retrieving some personal documents. They didn't suspect a thing. Ethan was asleep, and my mother was busy cooking oatmeal porridge. I quietly went upstairs to my father's old study, where he kept a safe hidden behind a cremation route map pinned to the wall. The passcode was still Ethan's birth date, unchanged. Inside were stacks of documents, life insurance policies, savings books, my grandmother's death certificate. And then I saw a faded yellow envelope with no sender's name. I opened it. A copy of a birth certificate, but not from Illinois, from Ohio. The listed mother, Rachel Harper, 17 years old. No father named. The last line stated clearly, the child was placed in Hope Haven Orphanage, at the maternal family's request to preserve honor and future prospects. I felt my chest tighten as if someone were crushing it. Inside the envelope was another slip of paper. Special case, assigned to Ronald and Willow Carter under confidential adoption program, source undisclosed. No date. No author. I sat still in that stifling room, the only sound the soft hum of the heater. So from beginning to end, I wasn't theirs. And they knew. They knew I was a selected child, not for love, but to become Ethan's biological insurance. All those nutritious meals, the concerned questions, the designer bag, were just preparatory steps in a profitable humanitarian donation. An investment. And now it was time to collect. I left that house with the documents in my bag, a heavy heart and a decision set in stone. I would not stay silent. Not this time. Immediately after leaving my parents' house with the birth certificate in my bag, I called Olivia. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, from Dr. Wilkins revealing that I had no blood ties with anyone in that household, to how I had broken into the safe and found a copy of my birth certificate from Ohio. Olivia was silent for several seconds, then spoke in a deep, steady voice. Emery, it's time. You need to confront them. But prepare carefully, and remember, record the entire conversation. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I knew Olivia was right, not just to protect myself, but to have evidence if things escalated. That evening, I didn't call. I wrote a short email to both my parents, with a single line. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., I want to talk. No delays, no evasion. I arrived on time, carrying a brown folder with a copy of the birth certificate, DNA confirmation, and hospital records, all neatly organized. When I walked into the living room, my father was already seated, hands clasped, expression unreadable. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face guarded. I sat down, opened the folder, and laid it on the table like a silent challenge. You knew everything, didn't you? I asked, my voice calm to the point of icy. You knew I wasn't your biological child. You knew the blood type didn't match, and you still wanted me to donate a kidney to Ethan. My mother raised her head, her voice sharp. You're misunderstanding everything, Emery. My father interjected, You're letting emotions distort the facts. We only want what's best for the family. I said nothing. I simply turned to the page with the doctor's signature and a note. The family has been aware of the incompatibility for 6 months, but still requested further testing. I rotated the file toward them. My mother's eyes twitched. She leaned back, her hands instinctively clutching her shirt hem. Best for the family? I pressed. Or best for Ethan? I flipped to the final page, a copy of the email Olivia had helped me obtain from the hospital system, clearly stating, hypothetical testing requested, despite knowledge that the female patient is not biologically related. My mother was speechless. She stammered, We raised you, gave you an education. There's no exploitation here. I looked at her, not with anger anymore, but with sheer exhaustion. Raising me doesn't entitle you to my organs. Being parents doesn't mean forcing a child into surgery for a brother who never respected her. The air was thick. A soft click sounded. I had turned on the recorder from the start. Every word, every reaction had been documented. My mother saw it, panicked. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I stood, locking eyes with my father one last time. I'm going to protect myself, and protect those who come after me, children who weren't chosen out of love but for purpose. I walked out without closing the door behind me. That night, Olivia and I stayed in her office past midnight. She helped me organize all the evidence, test results, the birth certificate, internal emails, the confrontation recording. On her laptop screen, the file was named Carter v. Emery, Medical Exploitation File 01. But to me, this was no longer a personal standoff. It was the beginning. For the first time in my life, I would no longer be silent. After the confrontation night, I couldn't sleep. I thought exposing the truth to their faces would bring relief, but it didn't. What I felt most was isolation. I had lost everything that once passed for family, though most of it had only been surface paint anyway. Olivia was right. This was just the beginning. The next day, I returned to my apartment and began reviewing every piece of mail and document my mother had sent over the years, hoping to find proof they had known about the incompatibility all along. I reopened old emails from Willow Carter, the folder titled Family Medical, messages she'd sent me over the past 2 years, mostly vaccination schedules, Ethan's prescriptions, and several vague attachments. One email stood out. The subject line read simply, FYI, latest updates from Dr. Felton, sent 6 months ago. I opened it. Inside was an exchange between my mother and Dr. Felton. a private physician who had previously worked with our family. The content was brief, but it hit like a slap to the face. Hi, Willow. I've reviewed Emery Carter's records. As we suspected, her blood type and HLA profile are not compatible with Ethan's. I understand the urgency, but I strongly advise not pursuing any transplant unless you've secured a legal waiver. Best regards. Beneath it was my mother's reply. Understood. I'll see what I can do. She's emotionally distant, but if we can create the right pressure, she might comply. We'll keep you updated. I sat motionless. The phrase create the right pressure, like a premeditated plan, devoid of any love. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just hollow, like all the images of my mother, from her younger face to feeding Ethan porridge, had turned to stone in my mind. I forwarded the entire email chain to Olivia, with a message. Is this enough? She replied almost instantly. Enough to bring down a whole family in court, but the real question is, are you ready? I reread that question several times. Then I opened my laptop and created a new folder titled Phase 2, Carter File, Pressure and Consent. From this point on, I would no longer do anything because they wanted it. I would do it. Because I needed to live as a real human being, with the right to control my body and my worth. I didn't have to wait long. A week after the confrontation, my mother sent a message. This Sunday, the whole family will be coming over. We want you to be there so everyone can discuss things properly. I didn't reply, but I knew exactly what they were planning. Olivia wasn't surprised. They're changing tactics, from direct pressure to communal pressure, and you need to be ready. On Sunday morning, I wore a plain white shirt, tied my hair back, and carried a thick document case and a backup hard drive containing all the recordings, emails, and DNA files. When I stepped into the old Carter home, noise poured from the living room. Nearly 20 relatives were present. They, people I once called aunt, uncle, cousin, were chatting, munching cookies, sipping coffee as if this were some warm family gathering. But when I entered, all eyes turned. Ethan sat on the sofa, weary, an IV still taped to his arm. My mother's cousin sneered at me. There she is. Now Ethan's survival depends on someone with no heart. Another voice, my father's sister, shook her head. Emery only knows numbers. She's been in finance too long to understand family. I didn't react. I sat in a chair facing the entire room, placed the case on the table, and calmly unzipped it. Before anyone continues questioning my morals, I think it's time to share a few truths. I laid out the documents one by one. The Ohio birth certificate copy, DNA test results, email exchanges between my mother and the doctor, and the recording transcript from last week's confrontation. I am not Ethan's biological sister. I am not Ronald or Willow's biological child, and I am not a compatible kidney donor. They've known this for 6 months, but still staged this entire charade. The room fell silent. My mother went pale, her hands trembling around her teacup. My father remained still, frowning slightly. Someone muttered, "Maybe there's been some kind of mistake?" I turned on my tablet, projecting the email on screen. Clear, unambiguous. Then I spoke slowly. I'm not here asking for sympathy. I just want everyone to know. I will not donate a kidney. Not because I'm selfish, but because I owe nothing to anyone in this room. Ethan, from the couch, growled, "You're nothing if you don't save me." I turned to him, locking eyes. "I owe you nothing. I wasn't born to save you. I am Emery. Not a tool, not a backup plan, and definitely not a shield for the mistakes of a loveless family." I stood, closed the case, and walked out of that house for the last time. Behind me were whispers, voices calling my name, someone sobbing. But I didn't look back, because for the first time, I was no longer a child seeking validation. I was simply myself, whole and free. I left that house on a winter afternoon, snow lightly falling on my shoulders. No one saw me off. No one called after me. The small apartment in Logan Square was no longer enough, so I moved to Wicker Park, a quieter place, far from every old memory. I rented a third-floor unit, with large windows overlooking bare trees and weathered brick walls. Each morning, I made coffee, sat in a gray chair, and breathed, quietly. No more texts from my mother. No more forced calls. I lived alone, and began learning how not to ask permission to do so. Olivia was the only one still by my side. She helped organize the files, backed up all the evidence onto a secure drive, and established legal safeguards in case my parents retaliated. But, beyond that, Olivia asked something I hadn't expected. "Have you thought about your birth mother?" I looked at her, a bit stunned. All this time, I had been too consumed by the betrayal in front of me to remember that I came from somewhere else. On the birth certificate, my birth mother's name was Rachel Harper, only 17 at the time. She had signed me over to Hope Haven Orphanage in Ohio. Olivia took the initiative to help me search for her. Meanwhile, I continued working remotely on financial cases for longtime clients. Investment plans, quarterly reports, market analysis, everything ran as usual, as if no emotional earthquake had struck. But after each email sent, each Zoom consultation ended, I still checked my phone. The quiet curiosity, like an undercurrent, had me waiting for a result from Olivia, though outwardly I remained composed. 1 week later, on a foggy Monday morning, she called just as I was making my first cup of coffee. Her voice through the phone was brief but enough to freeze me in place. "Emery, I think I found her." She sent me a link. Rachel Harper, CEO and founder, Harper Financial Group, New York City. The woman in the photo had light brown hair, firm eyes that weren't cold, and at the top of her page was a quote. "Finance isn't just about numbers, it's about responsibility and choice." I don't know why, but I read that line 3 times. For one brief moment, I felt like maybe it was her. I sent an email, just a few lines. I didn't say who I was. I didn't explain anything specific. I just wrote, "I believe we may be connected by something long past. If you would like to meet and verify, I'm willing." I didn't hope for anything, but I wasn't afraid of rejection either, because for the first time in my life, I was searching for the truth, not for anyone else, but because I believed I deserved to know who I was. Rachel replied after 3 days. Her busy schedule made me think I might never hear back. But then, on a weekday afternoon, I received a brief message. "I'll be at Café Bellamy, 43rd Street, Manhattan, at 10 a.m. this Saturday. If you truly want to meet, I'll be there." That was it. No confirmation of identity, no further words. I flew to New York Friday evening, brought a small suitcase, no makeup, no expectations. The next morning I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. The space was quiet, exposed brick walls, large windows letting in the morning light. I chose a corner table near the window, holding a cooling latte in pace with my heartbeat. At exactly 10, the cafe door opened. Rachel walked in. She wore a long caramel coat, her hair neatly tied back, no extravagant jewelry. When our eyes met, there was a momentary pause, as if time split in half. She approached, sat across from me. "Emery," she said, without asking. I nodded. We both sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she placed her hand on the table, not touching me, just resting it there, as a sign of presence. "I've known about you for 5 years," she said. "I happened to see your name in a financial news feature. Emery Carter, financial analyst for the Midwest region." The name, birth year, city, everything matched. I've carried it with me for years. I gripped the edge of my cup. "Why didn't you reach out?" Rachel looked at me, her eyes red but dry. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought maybe you had a stable life, and I had no right to disturb it. Because I still lived with the guilt." of a 17-year-old girl forced by her family to give up her child. Her voice cracked. I didn't know they would do that to you. If I had known, I cut her off, gently but firmly. I'm okay. I found the truth myself. She fell silent, swallowing a breath. I told her, not in detail but enough, that I had survived, that I was almost forced to donate a kidney, and about that humiliating family meeting. Rachel sat quietly for a long time. Then she reached her hand toward me, still not touching, and said, I can't change what happened, but if you ever need, I'll be here. As support, not as replacement. We sat in the cafe for another hour. No tears, no dramatic lines. Just two women, one who had lost a child, one who had been abandoned, taking their first steps toward each other. As I stood to leave, she handed me a business card. On the back, she had written in her own handwriting, If you ever need anything, no reason required. I took it, no promises, but no refusal either. As I left the cafe, I didn't look back, but in my coat pocket I held that card tightly as a quiet declaration. I was no longer invisible. I had roots, and I had the right to choose how I would keep living. We kept in touch after that first meeting, not constantly, not forcefully. Rachel sent me one email every weekend, not to monitor, but to share updates. Today, she had a meeting with Japanese investors. Tomorrow she'd attend a financial advisory conference for single mothers. She included photos, a morning teacup, her cluttered desk filled with post-it notes, sometimes an old book she was rereading. I didn't reply to all of them, but I read every one. A week later, she invited me back to New York, this time for a serious discussion. If you feel ready, she wrote, let me make a proposal. I took the earliest flight. This time, she welcomed me at the Harper Financial Group office, 32nd floor of a glass tower in the business district. The space was calm, modern, but warm. Nothing like the cold image I once associated with the word CEO. Rachel walked me through the departments, introduced her team, and then invited me into a small meeting room adjacent to her office. On the table was a printed profile. Mine. You have expertise. You have a foundation. You have the strength to handle crisis and deep insight into emotional manipulation. I want you to lead our strategy development team, designing financial advisory packages for women hurt by family dynamics. She paused. If you accept, this is the formal offer. I looked at the folder, then at her. Everything inside me went still for a few seconds. I understood she wasn't doing this out of guilt. She was a woman who had built everything from scratch, and this offer was recognition, not charity. But I shook my head, gently. Mom, thank you, but I don't want to step into what you've already built. I want to build something from my own cracks. She tilted her head, waiting. I opened my laptop, started the presentation I had prepared over 3 sleepless nights. I want to build an AI platform to help those who've been manipulated by family recognize the signs early, connect with therapists, and access legal protection templates. No one should have to walk out of trauma alone. Rachel said nothing for a few minutes. She just looked at me, her eyes lighting up, not with pride, but with understanding. Then she smiled gently. If you ever need financial support, no reason required, I'll be here. I nodded, but I knew I'd try my best not to need a single dollar from her, not out of pride, but because I wanted to know I could create something without needing anyone's permission. The meeting wasn't over yet when Rachel glanced at her watch regretfully. I would have loved to take you to lunch, she said, but I have a major meeting starting soon. It's been scheduled for 2 weeks. I can't move it. I nodded, no resentment. She quickly wrote on a sticky note listing a nearby lunch spot, Lyndon's Kitchen, and a popular cafe on the same street, Argyle and Finch. Try their sourdough sandwich, and if you have time, stop by Argyle. They serve an amazing iced lavender coffee. I smiled, not because of the food, but because of how she said it. natural, unforced, like we had been mother and daughter for years. Before I left, she hesitated and asked, "Could you come to my apartment tonight? I'd like to cook something for you." I nodded, this time with genuine anticipation. That evening, I arrived at her place, a quiet penthouse in Brooklyn with arched windows and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She went into the kitchen, put on an apron, and said, "Tonight, I want to make you something." I sat on a high stool, watching her quietly mix dough, set out softened butter, and gently dust cinnamon. When the scent of baked apples filled the room, I peeked at the tray and realized it was cinnamon apple crisp, the dessert I had once posted on social media 5 years ago, with a simple caption, "Wish someone knew how to make this for me when I'm tired." I'd never told anyone. Yet she remembered. Maybe she had followed me more closely than I thought. And that night, in a small kitchen lit by soft yellow light, for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as a tool, not as an obligation, not as a mistake rebranded as love, but as a person with a name, a palate, and a soul. Emery. I returned to Chicago early Monday morning, carrying a notebook full of scribbled ideas, a few paper sketches, and a new belief, not one aimed outward for validation, but inward for creation. The AI project didn't yet have a name, but its purpose was crystal clear: to support people, especially women, who had been manipulated by their families, helping them identify toxic behaviors, connect with mental health professionals, and prepare basic legal documents to protect themselves. I started with what I knew best: behavior. From old recordings of phrases my parents used, I reconstructed over 60 manipulation patterns, like, "If you don't do this, the family will fall apart," or "You owe your brother everything for raising you." I worked with an AI engineer named Daniel, who had previously developed a chatbot that identified verbal abuse for a nonprofit in California. He was surprised by how specific my family's scenarios were, unlike anything he'd encountered in academic settings. "You're not just building a tool," he said, "you're embedding real emotion into data." Together, we created a language model capable of detecting manipulative dialogue across emails, texts, and voice recordings. The second feature connected users with a network of mental health professionals and legal advisors, prioritizing those with limited budgets or urgent situations. The third, and the feature I spent the most time on, was the self-protection profile. A secure place to store evidence, trauma journals, and legal templates for users needing protection without immediate access to a lawyer. I designed the interface using the graphic skills I had learned at night classes in community college, not flashy, but friendly, simple, and never making the user feel like a victim. The project had no major funding. I used my personal savings, Olivia provided legal guidance, and Daniel accepted symbolic compensation because he believed in the mission. Every night, I worked until 2 a.m., coding with the team, writing empathetic guide content, recording voice samples, and designing each button on the app as if I were building an escape route for an earlier version of myself. Sometimes I cried in the middle of the night, not from exhaustion, but because, for the first time, I felt like all the pain I had endured wasn't meaningless. It had become living data, so that someone, somewhere, wouldn't have to go through the same thing alone. After nearly 4 months of working without rest, we launched the first trial version: a simple interface, 3 main features, and a small line at the bottom of each page. You are not alone. In the first week alone, the platform received nearly 800 visits, mostly from forums for women living with manipulative relatives, or from those who once sought help but were turned away for lack of evidence. A user named Lena Hope messaged, "Your app helped me name what I always suspected but never dared to say. I was forced to live under guilt." Another, T. Maria, wrote, "I've used the daily harm noting feature, and for the first time, I had the courage to say no to my mother. I read every line, saved every piece of feedback. They became extensions of the project and part of my own healing." But then, one early April morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Sender: ronald.willow.carter@outlook.com. Subject: Sorry. It took me over an hour to open it. Inside were short, clumsy lines. Ronald wrote, "We did wrong. Your mother is heartbroken over everything. She hasn't been able to sleep. She mentions you every day. If you can forgive us, please give us a chance." Below was an added line in my mother's voice. "I'm sorry for making you feel like an option instead of a child." I read it again and again, then turned off the screen. Olivia called at exactly the moment I needed. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" She asked, "Do you want to respond?" I stayed silent. I no longer needed to clarify, no longer hoped they'd understand or change. I just needed to hold my boundary. And this time, I had the tools to do so, not just with emotion, but with awareness. I opened my own app, typed into the inner journal system. I have the right to read an apology without having to forgive. I can choose peace without needing to close a chapter with a hug. Then I sent a short reply. "I received your message. I hope you both find peace, but I will not return. Please do not contact me again." I hit send. And, for the first time, I didn't feel shaky. That evening, I stood by my apartment window, looking at the golden lights stretching down a quiet street, and thought about the strangest thing. The very people who once silenced my voice had unknowingly helped me build a platform where others could reclaim their own. I thought everything had settled, boundaries were drawn, the project was running, and my new life had found its own rhythm. But then, one late weekend afternoon, just after I left a development team meeting at the community center in District 5, I saw Ethan standing in front of my apartment door. Thinner, paler, none of the arrogance of the man who once called me selfish. He stood with his head down, holding a small paper bag. When he saw me approach, he only said softly, "Can I say a few words?" I nodded but didn't invite him in. We stood in the third-floor hallway, where a soft breeze passed through the window crack and lonely footsteps echoed from nearby apartments. Ethan started speaking. No poetry, no justification, just fragments. I know I was awful. I got used to being forgiven. I thought if I stayed weak, my mistakes would be erased. But since learning the truth, I can't sleep. It feels like the whole family used you like a spare part, like you weren't a real person. He paused, pulled something from the bag. A small notebook. Dark blue hardcover, some pages loose from age. "I found this in the old house. Your diary from 8th grade. No one read it, except me. Back then, I just wanted to laugh at you. But now," his voice cracked. I held the notebook, recognizing the slanted handwriting of my 13-year-old self. "I want someone to choose me one day. For who I am. Not out of duty. Not for convenience." I tightened my grip on the corner of the book. Ethan looked at me, waiting for forgiveness. But I didn't say that. I only said, "I'm not that 8th grade girl anymore. And I don't need anyone to choose me, because I've already chosen myself." He nodded, eyes red. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, even if you didn't save me with a kidney, you saved me from the family illusion we both grew up in." We stood in silence for a few seconds. Then I opened my door, stepped inside, without looking back. Not out of coldness, but because everything that needed saying had been said. And when the door closed behind me, I felt no hatred, nothing left unresolved, just a quiet space, peaceful, clean, and ready for real life to begin. 6 months after facing Ethan, the AI project officially received funding from the Hope Bridge Social Tech Fund, a nonprofit that supports initiatives for mental health and legal equity for the vulnerable. It wasn't a huge grant, but enough to hire 2 more engineers, a UX expert, and a therapist to advise on content. We renamed the platform Bounder Ease, a blend of boundary and ease, with the tagline, helping you set boundaries without apologizing. I hosted our first online seminar on a Friday night with over 1,200 attendees across states, including women, men, and young people struggling with controlling families. I told my story, not as a tragedy, but as a living data journey. From a DNA test to an app that could help others escape the isolation I had carried for 2 decades. After the talk, the Zoom chat box filled with hundreds of messages. I was also forced to fund my drug-addicted brother. Your story gave me the courage to reopen the recording I used to be too scared to play. I think I've finally found the language to describe what I went through. I turned off the screen when the session ended, sitting still in my desk lamp's glow. No applause, no praise, just a deep sense of this. I had turned what once crushed me into a tool to help others rise. As for Rachel, our relationship unfolded in unexpected ways. Not overly close, not forced, but always present. Every 2 weeks we'd meet at a familiar cafe halfway between our flight paths. No one tried to start over. Instead, we learned how to walk beside each other. Once, I asked, "Did you ever imagine what life would have been like if you'd kept me?" She didn't answer right away. Just smiled, sipped her tea, then said, "If I had kept you, maybe neither of us would be here today. But now, we get to choose how to move forward." I didn't need anything more. I didn't need to call anything right or wrong. Because sometimes truth doesn't need redemption. It only needs to be told, so those who come after us don't have to grow up in silence. I bought my first home the following spring in the western suburbs of Chicago, a small 2-story house with a red brick front, large windows, and a backyard wide enough for lavender and mint. No flag on the porch, no family nameplate. Just a wind chime hanging by the awning, making clear sounds whenever the breeze passed, reminding me I was living in a space no one could reclaim. I personally chose paint colors for every room: olive green for the study, soft cream for the kitchen, and pure white for the room where I placed an old easel I once used at community college. In the living room, I hung a painting I made. Not high art, just a girl standing in a field, shielding her eyes from the sun, facing toward the distance where no one stood but herself. I named it "Not Here to Be Seen." I converted part of the lower level into a community workroom, where young people could come to brainstorm ideas, access Bounder Ease for free, or simply sit in peace. I placed a small bookshelf with titles on psychology, personal rights, and recovery. On the wall, I hung a single line: "You don't have to be broken enough to deserve help. You just have to want to understand yourself." Every weekend afternoon, I opened the doors, made tea, and spent a few hours talking with whoever came, not as an expert, but as someone who had walked where they stood. Some came just to sit. Some cried, some said nothing, but came back the next week, and I realized this house didn't need to be big because it wasn't meant to hold people. It was meant to let people know they could step in, unjudged. Like the kind of place I dreamed of as a child, writing secret diaries in a drawer. Now I had that place, and for the first time, I didn't write for anyone to read, didn't wait for anyone to understand. I wrote for myself, and for the lives learning to name their worth again. That evening, I sat alone in the attic room of my new house, where I had placed an old telescope I bought from a thrift store in Evanston. I'd never studied astronomy, but something about the distant stars made me feel small without feeling insignificant. I looked into the night sky, a deep navy stillness, sparse clouds. The stars said nothing. They just were, needing no permission, no proof of origin. And I realized, after all these years I had been trying to find a reason for my existence in the Carter family. I wanted to be loved, to be accepted, to prove that I was worthy. But the truth is, No one needs to be worthy to be human. No one is born to make up for someone else. I was not the instrument of a medical plan, not the fallback for a sickly biological child. I am Emery, and my existence alone grants me the right to be protected, to choose, and to walk away when I'm not safe. Now, I don't need validation from my old family. I don't need apologies soaked in tears. I don't need the world to understand how much I was hurt. I just need one thing: to live a life true to myself, clear, with boundaries, and no longer endured in silence. I opened my laptop, typed the closing line of my upcoming keynote for the AI for Healing conference in San Francisco. I wrote, "You don't owe your worth to anyone, not because you're a child, not because you're a sister, not because you've endured, not because someone raised you. If you're reading this and have ever felt like the only one holding a secret pain, I'm here to say, you are not alone. Seek the truth, set your boundary, and if you can, tell your story, not to be believed, but so you'll no longer doubt that what you went through was real." I hit save, and when I looked back through the telescope, I saw a streak across the sky. Maybe a shooting star, maybe a satellite. But I didn't make a wish, because I didn't need to wish anymore. I just needed to live, with the peace and the voice I had reclaimed from within myself. My story may not be like yours, but if you've ever felt like a tool in your own family, ever been treated as a duty rather than a person, ever stayed silent thinking you were too sensitive, then you're not alone. Out there, thousands, millions, are learning to say I again, learning to breathe without permission, learning to walk away without guilt. And if you're still listening now, I thank you. Not just for hearing my story, but for staying with yourself this long. We don't get to choose where we are born, but we can choose where we keep living. Tell your story, if you're ready, so that those looking for signs might see a light. And if you need a community to listen, to believe you, to not ask you to prove your pain, leave a comment below. We are here.